Okay, you are live.
All right, good evening. I would like to call the Akron City Council Reimagining Public Safety Special Committee Accountability and Transparency Working Group meeting to order. Um, as you said, I guess all members are present. So, can I have a motion for approval of the October 14 meeting minutes?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? All
Aye.
right.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Okay, this evening I'd like to welcome our liaisons, Lieutenant Chris Brown, Sergeant Forrest Kapler, Sergeant Ralph Spano, and we have a special guest, Mr. Fred Davey, who is chair of the New York City Civilian Review Board, Best Practices in Civilian Oversight and Accountability of Police Institutions, who will be speaking a little bit later in the program. We're going to start things out with our own Akron Police Department discussion with on policy and review as it regards the revision process, and also new policies and revisions. So we're going to get that started with Lieutenant Chris Brown. So whenever you're ready, Lieutenant, we're ready to hear you.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So about a year ago, it was actually almost to the date a year ago, Deputy Police Chief Jesse Weitzer asked me to lead the committee to look at our procedures and update those that were needed. Some had not been updated for many, many years. So we took a fresh look at everything. We had about 7 or 8 committee members. Some were captains, lieutenants, sergeants. We examined the list of procedures and we prioritized them. Which ones needed to be updated first, which ones could wait a little while. And what I would do then as chair of this committee, I assigned a procedure to each committee member or two, and I provided them with model policies from the International Associations of Chief of Police, the Police Executive Research Foundation, sometimes other departments, to look at and see how our policies shaped up with them. Most of our procedures already were in line with IACP standards and really didn't need a lot of changes. Some of them just needed some updating to reflect new technology around the police department, like the routine system, reporting system. Also, these members would seek out police officers, anybody with specialty knowledge for policy areas, and get some input for their drafts from them. The law department also provided some input on some of these procedures, especially some of the critical ones. And some of the procedures information came from the Ohio Collaborative. I'm assuming most of you are familiar with the Ohio Collaborative, but our viewers or guests are not. In 2014, then Governor Casey signed an executive order creating a task force on community police relations following some incidents that happened here in Ohio and around the nation. And the task force recommended the creation of the Ohio Collaborative Police Advisory Board to oversee the implementation of recommendations of the Task Force on Police Community Relations. They have state standards on police policy, and we recognize that police recognize the importance of being a part of the Ohio Collaborative and getting this certification. We were one of the first groups to be certified when it first came out. So in order to be certified, we had to adjust our policies, make sure that they were aligned with the collaborative standards. What these standards are, we would submit our policy to them, and they would tell us if it met their standards or not. The first two that were required were the use of force and recruiting and hiring. Not surprisingly, our use of force was ready to go as needed. It needed no changes. It met the collaborative standard already. However, I did have to write a policy on recruiting and hiring. That was adopted by the department and was approved by the collaborative, is used by our recruiting and hiring staff now. Collaboratives created standards for several other policies we've adapted: community engagement, body-worn camera, telecommunications training for our dispatchers and call takers, bias-free policing, and investigation of employee misconduct. We've adapted our policies to ensure that we've met the collaborative standards, and We continue with membership today. Don't let me forget the pursuit procedure was also in there. We've met standards in all these policies. Getting back to our procedure committee, the goal was to incorporate best practices and most updated information into our procedures. The committee members would draft a procedure, give those procedures to me and the deputy chief. We would review them, make any needed adjustments, and we give them to the chief for review. Once he approved the procedure, we would release it to the employees for adopting as department policy. Several critical policies that we did work for the law department, and overall we have about 69 procedures currently in place. 67 of them were updated in the last year. So it was a tremendous undertaking. Sergeant Kapler and Spano were both on that committee, and I thank them for their work and everybody else's, because it wasn't an easy task to get all that done. The only two procedures that we haven't updated are the social media procedure, because we're making sure it's in line with the city's social media procedure, and the uniform procedure, which is still under construction, because I think this is a bid year for new uniforms. Several new policies that we adopted. One of them I'm particularly proud of is called voluntary contacts, investigative stop, pat downs, and arrest, which covers every form of citizen contact a police officer can make, and it replaced our older summons and release procedure. And most of this, almost every single word from this procedure was taken from the International Association of Chiefs of Police model. So it's one of our best procedures, I think, in that regard. We had a new procedure was risk management procedure, which covered any time a citizen is really injured at the hands of a police officer, the notifications that are made to the law department, etc. Zoo response procedure we wrote this year, and that's how to handle an escaped animal, or what might be more common is if a human entered one of the animal enclosures at the Akron Zoo. As you imagine, we would work in coordination with the zoo staff to solve those situations. Custodial interrogations. Some time ago, our policy fell out of constitutional law. So we rewrote our custodial interrogations policy to reflect new laws and technology. School threat investigations. As you know, that happens a lot these days. We'll be aware of a threat at a school, and we've taken steps to handle those threats and what to do when those come in. And the bias-free policing, which came from the Ohio Collaborative, we've also put that in place this year as a new procedure. Currently, we're working on a procedure, a new one called motor vehicle stops and searches, which will cover, anytime a police officer stopped the motorist. And so that's pretty much the update, what we did to come up with these procedures, how our committee worked. And now they're all posted on our city website, akroncops.org. Any procedure you'd like to look at, you can go there and read and see how our actions are governed in any situation that we would encounter on the job. So that's pretty much how our procedure updated worked over the last year. Any questions I can answer about that?
I have one.
Go ahead.
I have one. So actually, the last thing that you said interests me, because, every morning we get the daily report from Lieutenant Mike Miller
Yes.
regarding what went on last night. And, I feel really bad. I mean, there's such an appreciation for you guys, because you stop these vehicles, and invariably, 3-4 times a week, it says, so the passenger reached under the seat and there was a gun, so just maybe a little tidbit on the motor vehicle stop and searches. I mean, how do you approach that? Because everybody seems to have a gun these days. So
Yeah, we just putting this policy in place once we get it done, but our training already dictates what officers do on these, as does constitutional law. So we have a great training staff. We've been down to our training bureau. They really get our officers prepared to handle those situations. And you're right. It seems to be lately more and more we are recovering a lot of firearms. If you've seen our statistics on Akron Cops .org. And, our guys, our officers are out there working hard for the city of Akron every day, sometimes putting their lives on the line to get these guns off the street. So I appreciate that you appreciate the fine work they're doing.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Lombardo. Now, you talked about you guys updated 67 out of 69 procedures. Out of those 67 that were updated, in what order of importance did you guys take those? Were there situations that stood out or were more urgent than other updates, or were they addressing like current issues that were occurring like right now, where you had to just prioritize according to what was going on as far as safety and policing?
But to tell you the truth, a lot of the prioritizing came from how long ago the procedure was written. And I can tell you that one of our procedures was last written, I think, in 1984, or maybe it was in 1990. It was on dealing with folks that are hearing, deaf and hard of hearing. So that certainly needed an immediate update to ensure it reflected with constitutional law and what's going on there. So some of the older procedures that the older ones needed to be updated first. So, and we also received some input from the law department, which ones they wanted prioritized. So that's how we came up with that, and we got them done. Some had just been updated recently, like our use of force procedure was last done in 2015, and since it already met the collaborative standards, it was one of the last ones that we did, but we did adjust it to reflect some new information and add some things in there. Really, before a lot of this started happening nationally, we were already ahead of that. So that's pretty much how we came up with that prioritization.
Okay, thank you. It looks like a lot of your information and basis for it comes from constitutional law and the international model. Are those the two main entities that you use for a lot of policing procedures and policies?
Yeah, we're really not inventing the wheel here. A lot of these, the IACP, they have model procedures and they're being adopted nationwide by departments. And a really good source of procedures are, say, like a department that's under a consent decree, because you know that their procedures are going to be the most stringent. But we would take some information there. So we gather what we thought were good, how they were in line, and really what they met our needs, and how we could model those towards what we do here in Akron. So yes, a lot of this stuff came from IACP, which is one of the leading organizations, and so is PERF, which is the Police Executive Research Foundation. Nationally, they're one of the leading organizations in the country as far as policing.
Okay, thank you. It looks like you got quite a grasp on that. So I'm sure that when you were working on that, it was very fulfilling. Seems like you encompassed a lot of information and you held on to it. And there was one other thing I wanted to ask you. Whenever you guys do your revisions or institute new policies or procedures or tweak or whatever, how much participation are the other law enforcement officers given as far as input or suggestions in that process?
Yeah, sure. When I would assign a committee member or two to work on a particular draft, their instructions were to go reach out, find people that has particular specialization in that area, and get input from them. So it was a collaborative effort by many people. And as you can imagine, all those procedures within a year, it was a lot of moving parts, and it was no small undertaking, the work that the people of the committee had done. But yeah, we got as much information as possible, law department, how collaborative, officers, model policies, best practices, other departments nationwide. So we try to get as much information as possible, make sure that the policies and procedures of the Akron Police Department are, best and most updated and most progressive in many regards for law enforcement.
Yeah, it seems like you have a real good diverse group of entities and different organizations and things that you're incorporating in the process. So it seems like it's pretty widespread, which is really good, because then you can get more input and broaden some of the vision or some of the information that comes from these various groups. So that's just good to learn that without actually having to go in and try to get it. You gave a great overview of that. So I'm sure that, in the future, some other things will come out of that. But I'd like to say thank you for that information. And then also ask if Sergeant Kapler or Sergeant Spano wanted to add anything in as far as policy and procedures. No one?
Yeah, I don't have anything at this time.
Okay, is that you, Sergeant Kapler?
Yes, ma'am, it was.
Okay, all right. Now, one other thing too, I was thinking, does the Akron Police Department, we don't have the consent decree, right? Are we using that?
No, we
Okay,
do not, we are not under a consent decree from the Justice Department.
okay. Do you see that as an advantage or a disadvantage?
Well, to get put under a consent decree, that means, that means that you have, your department has been accused of some civil rights violations enough that the Justice Department has given you some attention. And luckily, our department here in Akron has not had any kind of scrutiny like that.
Okay, good. That's good to hear.
Madam Chair, I'm not sure if you can see that Councilman Malik has his hand raised.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Councilman Malik.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you, Lieutenant Brown. Really appreciate you sharing this. I know that the policies went on the web a couple of months ago, and I think that getting the message out that these policies have been under review is really helpful. Just a couple of questions. First of all, I know a couple of the policies, particularly body-worn camera, involved some community input as well. Are there other of the policies that had community input, and is there any thought about that going forward?
As far as I know, that is the only one. The victim assistance procedure that we updated, that obviously had some input from that organization because it affected them. But yeah, when we came up with the body-worn camera procedure, we did invite a committee of community members in, and they had input in the creation of that committee, into that procedure, I'm sorry. But as far as I know, that's the only one that's had an extensive amount of community involvement. And certainly, I mean, if some citizens had some suggestions, we would be open to listening to that.
Sure. I don't know whether there might be some kind of, public comment process or something, particularly for some of the more sensitive policies, but that may be one idea. Another question, I know some of the policies, go through the law department. I know we've talked about the intervention system. Are there other policies that are still being worked on by the law department?
That's the one I think now it's either law or labor relations. That's the only policy that's a new one that we're trying to get in place. But as I stated in our last meeting, we're not waiting for that procedure to be, but we're already taking steps to use that technology in the early warning system already.
Sure. And I hope I know we talked a little bit, maybe at the next meeting, we might be able to go into detail on the early warning system a little bit more, because I think that would be another positive story to tell. And then on the Ohio Collaborative, I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, a constituent had reached out to me a couple of months ago and had mentioned she had sent the 2020 certification report that they posted on their website. and it under the Group 3 standards. Sorry, I'm looking at it here. Under the Group 3 standards, it said that APD wasn't certified. I think that was the bias-free policing standards. So I don't know if that seemed like it was the latest report, but do you know where we are on that?
I don't, but I will tell you that before we approved our bias-free policing, I sent that to the collaborative to make sure it met the standards, and it did. If we haven't submitted it to them, I'm sure that's in place. And I don't think we were due to do that until next year. I'm not quite sure on that. I know our research, planning and research
Sure.
unit is the one that keeps those up to date. But I know it meets the collaborative standards. So it's just a matter of getting it to them if we haven't already.
Thank you. Yeah, I know that it said that there was the certification in the other two groups, and so I know that the bias-free policing policy was updated recently. So maybe we can follow up on that, but that's good. Yeah, that was all I had. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you again, Lieutenant Brown. And I just wanted to say for anyone else that's listening or watching, you can go to akroncops.org. That is the official website of the police department for the citizens of Akron. So again, akroncops.org, and it has a wealth of information. I was looking over it a little bit, and I'll go deeper into it a little bit later. There's a wealth of information over there, and I'm sure that we can learn a lot just by going on there and pulling some of that information. All right, so Mr. Davey, are you ready?
Thank you. Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself? You came out with a blast. You're like,
oh, was it very loud?
No.
Okay.
It was just unexpected for me because I was just asking if you were ready and then you just appeared.
I see.
Councilwoman Baylor, would it be okay if I introduced Mr. Davey?
Sure. Absolutely.
I just wanted to make sure to so Mr. Fred Davey, who's joining us today, has been the chair of the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board since April of 2018. He's also the executive vice president of Union Theological Seminary in New York City. He's a Presbyterian minister and has worked in a variety of policy and government roles, including as part of the White House Council on faith-based and neighborhood partnerships. So I connected with him a few months ago, and very honored to have his participation here with us tonight. I know that he's been a force in New York City for trying to work on accountability, but also working constructively with the police department. And I've shared with Mr. Davies some of what we've been working on. And so hopefully he can, talk about the experience in New York City a little bit and how that relates to, sort of general conversations about accountability.
Okay,
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And I want to thank Shamash Malik, Councilmember Malik, for inviting me to join you and the subcommittee to talk about civilian oversight of law enforcement, particularly police departments. I have a few prepared remarks, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions. As chair of the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, as I said, it's my pleasure to join you here and to share some of what we've been able to learn and accomplish here in New York City. About civilian oversight. For context, it might be helpful for me to provide a little bit of background about the CCRB. The CCRB, Civilian Complaint Review Board in New York City, has actually existed for quite some time, but it wasn't until 1993, under Mayor David Dinkins, that it took on its current form as an independent agency. And today, the agency is the largest independent, all-civilian police oversight entity in the country. And it has the power to review civilian complaints about the NYPD, which is the nation's largest police department. The CCRB is made up of 15 members and it is staffed by 200 people, the majority of whom are investigators. Of the 15 board members, the mayor appoints 5, the city council appoints 5, and the police commissioner designates 3, and the public advocate appoints 1. In addition, the chair of the board is appointed jointly by the mayor and the city council speaker. In accordance with the terms of the New York City Charter, the CCRB investigates allegations of excessive force, abuse of authority, discourtesy, and offensive language. We receive about 5,000 complaints a year that fall within that jurisdiction. Upon receipt of a complaint, which may be filed online or by phone or by mail or in person, an investigator will contact and interview the civilian. The investigator will also interview the subject officer and any officers who may have witnessed the incident, who by law are required to cooperate with the investigation. After doing those interviews, examining the scene of the evidence of the incident, and collecting all the relevant evidence, the investigator completes a closing report and turns everything over to the board of the CCRB. A panel of 3 of the 15 board members must review every case and vote on whether the officer's actions violated the law and/or the NYPD patrol guide. One aspect that makes the CCRB unique among civilian oversight entities is that it has subpoena power, which enables the investigators to obtain records from, for example, medical facilities and commercial establishments. This is particularly notable when it comes to obtaining surveillance footage, video footage. As our data has shown, that video footage, whether it's surveillance video or cell phone video, a body-worn camera video, that surveillance footage has a significant impact on the board's ability to make a determination about what happened during an incident. Another important facet of our board is its administrative prosecution unit, which in the most serious cases of misconduct, prosecutes members of the NYPD at a departmental trial. The prosecution unit, made up of about a dozen attorneys, has prosecuted more than 600 officers since its inception in 2013. Before this special unit was established, the CCRB would conduct investigations, turn its evidence over to the NYPD, and have no role to play in the departmental trial. That landed New York City in a place where, in the 18 months before the prosecution unit was established, not a single officer was prosecuted for misconduct. Fast forward to today, and as I noted, hundreds of officers have been prosecuted in public trials, departmental trials. Most notably, Officer Daniel Pantaleo, who was found guilty of using a fatal chokehold on Eric Garner, was fired from the NYPD last year after our prosecution unit's prosecutors argued for his termination. Perhaps one of the elements we're proudest of as an agency is our Youth Advisory Council, which we launched in 2018. This group of young New Yorkers representing all 5 boroughs of the city has proven to be a source of incredible insight about the issues affecting youth. Our most recent issue-based report, a report our policy team published on the relationship between youth and the NYPD. That report paints a picture of just how much work there is to do on that front in New York, that being the relationship between our police officers and our young people, particularly our young people of color. And it makes me all the more grateful to have this group of smart, community-oriented young people leading the way in the conversation about how to move forward. Now, as people in New York City, and of course, people across the nation, including in Akron, demand police reform, it is incumbent upon us to identify ways to improve the police disciplinary system. And on November 5th, 2019, New Yorkers voted to implement a set of changes to the New York City Charter that make the disciplinary process more transparent, strengthen the CCRB's oversight capabilities, and improve agency efficiency. Among those changes are the expansion of the board to its current 15-member structure, a requirement for the police commissioner to provide written explanations for deviations from the board's disciplinary recommendations, expanding the CCRB's jurisdiction to include false official statements made by officers to the CCRB in the course of an investigation, and then a linking of the CCRB's headcount to the headcount of the NYPD's uniform officer headcount. On June 12, 2020, the state legislature overturned State Law 50A, and it was repealed, and in its repeal, it authorized the CCRB to provide the public with information about officers in their own complaints, as well as the disciplinary records of other officers in the communities that they serve. This is a major step forward in bolstering public confidence in the disciplinary system, allowing for more comprehensive reporting about police misconduct, and ultimately changing the dynamic for the better between the police and civilians. Although the police unions have sued to prevent the agency from releasing its records, the CCRB is committed to fighting to preserve what New Yorkers and lawmakers intended through the repeal of this law that shielded the police disciplinary records. We anticipate the courts will rule in our favor. So from our monthly board meetings, during which everyday New Yorkers may share their questions and concerns about policing in New York, to our outreach unit, which meets residents of our city where they are, where they live, to ensure they know how to report police misconduct, to our recent expansion on social media, the CCRB is in constant pursuit of new, innovative ways to connect with and serve New York City. We're more than happy to assist as you strive to do the same in Akron. I want to thank you again for this invitation. I look forward to addressing any questions you may have. Now, I do know from having read some recent accounts that one big issue is access to body-worn camera footage. And as I said in my prepared remarks, body-worn camera footage, not only having video footage, period, helps the CCRB, the Civilian Complaint Review Board, to close cases on their merits. And that is that we can both substantiate allegations better, as well as exonerate officers. In fact, both of those statistics have gone up for us. Our substantiation rate has gone up, but also our exoneration rate has gone up because we have body-worn camera footage. These cases are closed on their merits. Where we could do better, and it sounds like this may be an issue for Akron as well, is on our investigators having direct access to body-worn camera footage. We've reached an agreement with the NYPD to have more efficient access, but we've not gone the step we need to go so that the investigators can have direct access through the technology that currently exists. But overall, I'm proud of the steps that we've made. I think we've used some of the best practices in civilian oversight and police community relations, and would look forward to, as is appropriate, being a resource to any of your conversations about civilian oversight of law enforcement. So I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Any questions for Mr. Davey?
Madam Chair, I can see that Shelby Stevens Kennedy has her hand raised.
All right, go ahead, Shelby.
Thank you. Mr. Davey, I was just really interested in the Youth Advisory Council. So I was wondering how the members of that council are chosen and what are the age ranges of that council?
sorry. It's a wide range of ages. The age ranges from, I think, 15 to 30. And then the prospective members apply online. Generally, they're recommended by youth councils around the city, from faith-based to community-based youth councils around the city. Some of our local college students from the colleges and universities as well. And then we have a group within the CCRB itself, within the agency itself, that reviews those applications, and then on the basis of a set of criteria, make the choice as to who will make up the council for a given year.
And I'm sorry, one more question. How many people are usually on that council?
Well, I think the latest council was about 20 or 25.
Okay, thank you.
I should just mention too, the council, Youth Advisory Council, under the new police commissioner, Dermot Shea, had its first, and the new chief for community engagement, had its first one-on-one ever with members of the police department. It was a very useful conversation, very honest, very raw, but very real and very respectful. And it was so successful that one of the deputy police commissioners for community outreach engagement has asked us if we would organize a citywide conversation that involves multiple youth councils and youth groups. So we're in the process of putting that together now. But it's proven so far to be an excellent way. Just one more of the tools in the toolbox to improving police-community relations.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Councilman Malik has his hand raised.
Go ahead, Councilman Malik.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Davey, for your presentation. I really appreciate it. I know I have a couple of questions. First, in terms of, I think that your office has a policy unit that helps and assists with some reports and data analysis and making recommendations. Can you talk a little bit about how that plays out, and how that, since we're talking about policy a little bit tonight?
Sure, absolutely. So that is correct. There is a policy unit. It's about a half a dozen staff. And essentially we look at patterns and practices in policing in New York that emerge in the cases we review. So as I said, there are about 5,000 cases that fall under the CCRB's jurisdiction in any given year. In those cases, and the investigation of those cases will tell you a lot about patterns and practices that either are working or not working. And so what our unit does is writes up reports on those things, and it makes them public. One of the most recent ones that we did, since we were talking about youth, was on youth. And we had a set of recommendations for the department, which the commissioner agreed to adopt. He said he would adopt and implement every one of them. And we are now monitoring that and having conversations with them about how that's going and how that's proceeding. We'll issue reports. We are now, I'm going to do a public statement soon on our investigations related to last spring's Black Lives Matter response to the killing of George Floyd, and how the department handled those protests. We will look at any patterns and practices there that need to be addressed. Now the governor has his investigative work going on there, as does the mayor, through our corporation council and the Department of Investigation. But the Civilian Complaint Review Board will, as we normally would do, We'll look at patterns and practices there, and that particular encounter or those encounters, and then our policy unit will issue a report on what we learned from those reviews about how the department might make some adjustments in how it engages with the public.
Sure, thank you. I guess just to provide just a quick comment and another question, one of the reasons that I know New York City and Akron are not the same. New York is one of the largest countries, one of the largest cities, the largest city has had a lot of issues, whether it's stop and frisk and the killing of Eric Garner and other things. I think just for context, my idea in bringing you on here was not necessarily make a comparison, but actually per the point that Lieutenant Brown made earlier, that oftentimes when you're looking at how to change your policies, you go to places that have really looked at these things in depth in terms of consent decree or things like that. And I think it is helpful as we're looking at Mr. Young's role as the police auditor to think through and look at places where they have robust models of oversight and see how those work and see how those potentially benefit community trust so that we don't end up in a place where we have a consent decree. I know and like I said, that's only one part of it. The work that the department is doing is an important part of it, but I just want to, from my perspective, share that. But going back to body-worn cameras, we have a situation where, because there certainly is a concern about, information that may be on a body-worn camera footage, whether it's, that might be law enforcement privileged information. And so currently those body-worn camera videos are treated as a public record. So, if the auditor would request it, he requests it through the public records process, which could take several weeks in terms of redaction. I know as a former city lawyer who was involved in the redaction process. But can you talk a little bit about the compromise that you guys negotiated with the New York Police Department in terms of having more ready and direct access? Because I think that is something that, certainly we appreciate the reviews that's done internally, but looking at how Mr. Young might have more access to more direct access to body camera footage going forward. Can you talk a little bit about that compromise?
Sure, yeah. So we have a memorandum of understanding with the department where we now have a room. It's actually in the same building where the CCRB has its offices, might be on the same floor, I don't recall. So that we now have monitors, and the monitors allow our investigators to have direct access. Those monitors are themselves monitored by members of the NYPD. But in the past, we would have to make a request to PD of what we were looking for. They would then send their people to look for it. Very often, we were told that no body-worn camera footage existed for what we were looking for, only to discover in another investigation that indeed body-worn camera did exist. And so then we'd go back and then we'd have to ask again. It really slowed down the completion rates of investigations. And so when we produced the evidence that we were getting a lot of false negatives and talked to the department, they agreed that we could improve on this process. So we did a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, that now allows for not quite direct access, but our investigators can go to these monitors with officers. We know what we're looking for. We go to get it. If there's any, for example, if there's a minor in any of the video, that can be pixelated out now. Or if there's some piece of the recording that we shouldn't hear, of course, you can mute that out as well, which happens. I still believe that our investigators should have absolutely direct access. The technology exists to do it. There's secure technology to do it. I'll continue to advocate for that. That is not a position of the entire board, but that happens to be, I think, a position of the majority of the board at the moment. But right now, we're very pleased that the commissioner and that his staff have worked out this MOU with us, and that we have greater access than we had. And that involves investigators being able to go to a monitor and pull up the footage that they need for an investigation.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Davey, I wanted to ask, how long have you been with the CCRB?
So I was appointed by the mayor in 2016.
Okay.
And I was appointed acting chair in 2017 and permanent chair in 2018. And then we had a charter change last November that required the mayor and the city council to appoint the chair. And so they both reappointed me chair just this year in July.
Since you've been in that role, what are some of the differences that you see have taken place since you arrived in that spot?
Yeah, one of the things I want to say, and it's a point that Council Member Malik made, and I saw Police Officer Brown, I don't know if you're a detective or I want to give you your right title, shaking his head in agreement with that. New York is not Akron, and Akron's not New York, and I want to appreciate that. But I do think there's some best practices and principles of civilian oversight that should apply regardless of city, regardless of police force size. And I hope that my presentation helped to highlight some of those. But I think the biggest thing, the big issue here is, first of all, how do we keep people safe, right? So everybody wants safe cities without violating people's rights. I think that's absolutely crucial and fundamental to who we are as a democracy. And we should never lose sight of that, because if we do, we just become an authoritarian police state, and we have no claims of moral authority anywhere if we become that. So I think that's first. I think secondly, we really need to understand how to improve the relationship between police and communities, particularly police communities of color. There is this thing between men of color and cops, and particularly white cops, that we have to be honest about. And I just think we're in we too often want to slip into a state of denial or easy answers. We really have to look at this issue. So the department has, in fact, the city has citywide instituted implicit bias training for its officers, and it's required. Now, I think that should be not a one-time thing, but it should be an ongoing thing, not only for members of the NYPD, but probably for all people employed by the city of New York. The members of the board of the CCRB were required by regulation to take the implicit bias training. I actually think it should be an annual thing for us as well, but certainly it should be annual for the NYPD. But we're making progress, so so some of these issues are being addressed, but I do think we have to take seriously community police relations, and particularly as it has to do with men and boys of color and the department. I think more transparency in sharing the disciplinary records of officers is crucial. And we made a big step in New York State in that regard by repealing the law that shielded these records from the public. Now, as I said in my remarks, to the unions, the police unions are challenging that in court. But I think in the end, we will prevail, and that information will continue to be made public. At the point that the law was changed and before it was challenged in court, under a full request from the Civil Liberties Union, New York Civil Liberties Union, and the ACLU, we did release something like 220,000 police disciplinary records dating back to the mid-1980s to the present. And there's been no issue of any significance with those disciplinary records being made public. I think it just increases people's confidence that the department's not trying to hide anything or cover anything up. The final thing I would say is that, well, two things. One, I do think these community meetings that we do every month are really, really important, because we get to hear from the public about what some of their concerns are. There are generally representatives from the precincts of the communities where these meetings are being held. and they're able to answer questions and provide perspective and insight for the conversations that are being had. And then I actually think, and I've said this public other places, that the department can get better at engaging troubled officers early on before they become an issue. And then there are enough, I think, patterns there early in an officer's career so that you know who's going to be an issue and who isn't. And I think there needs to be just a change in the culture so that those folks are dealt with earlier, and then that the men and women of the department who come to work and do their jobs and go home to their families can do that and not be tarnished by the folks who have other agendas when they put on that badge and strap on that gun. So I think if the department continues to focus in on those officers very early on who are presenting issues, then it's going to be better for everyone, the entire department, where a vast majority of the officers just are doing their jobs and don't deserve the tarnish and the reputations they get from those who don't do their jobs well.
All right, thank you. Any other questions before we close this segment? Well, I just want to say thank you very much.
Sorry, I think Lieutenant Brown had his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lieutenant Brown. I can't see a thing. I'm gonna use my iPad the next time so I can see everybody.
I forgot how to raise my hand on this. I was clicking around and couldn't figure it out. But I just wanted to say that, New York handles 5,000 citizen complaints a year. We handle 50. That's what we're averaging, 50 here in the city of Akron. And our review process is very similar. We interview the complainant, the officers type a written statement, and it's all reviewed. And then when it's done, that package is then given to the independent police auditor for review. There has been a lot of, discussion about body-worn camera access. And what makes maybe us a little more unique than New York is that here we have the law enforcement automated data system that we use here in the state of Ohio. And it is a violation of Ohio law for that information to be shared to a non-law enforcement person or a prosecutor, or, they have to be a prosecutor or a criminal justice agency to get that information. So you can have access to the video, that we just have to make sure that that information is redacted so that we don't run afoul of the law and lose our leads access. And what that law enforcement automated data system is like, it keeps the data system, like your license plate, your registration, running your social security number to find out any criminal history information. All that stuff is there. And it almost darn near every video that I've seen, that I watch, we've got an officer getting on the radio calling somebody's information in with our dispatchers to check them out. And that information has to be redacted so that we don't run afoul of Ohio state law in that regard. So that's where we're, once that information is redacted, then the information is, the video can be viewed by a non-law enforcement person. So I just wanted to make sure that that's clear. I'm not sure if I imagine you have a system very similar somewhere in New York, and I'm not sure how you guys navigate around that particular, and that's the privilege information I think that the councilman had mentioned. But I just wanted to mention
technology. Yeah, I appreciate that, and the technology is there to redact it. So it is when I watch. I sit on the panels that review the body-worn camera and other surveillance video footage, telephone calls, etc. And if there's anything in any of that, then the technology there redacts it before we actually look at it. The other thing I would just say is that just kind of as a best practice, rather than our investigators working for the department, our investigators are actually trained and work for the civilian oversight agency within the areas where we have jurisdiction. And I just think that increases the confidence of the public in the fact that you're getting an impartial civilian-led investigation of a civilian complaint.
And Councilwoman Baylor, if I can just make one comment on that.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, I certainly appreciate the point that Lieutenant Brown is making. And I think that that's kind of where I was looking at the compromise that the MOU that was made between NYPD and the CCRB, because I think that, I certainly understand state law is state law. We can't mess with that. But also at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily make sense to me that if a completed complaint package goes from APD to Mr. Young, I think he should be able to look at the body cam footage of that without necessarily going through the same line, standing in the same line for public records as an ordinary citizen would in the law department. And so if there's some way of streamlining that process of having, of having some expedited review or something like that, I think that that's something that would be positive, and we're all on the same team here. So I think that was kind of where I was coming from. Thank you.
I have a question for Mr. Davey.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Davey, you talked about the cases that you handle. Are all those cases redacted before the CCRB receives them?
Do you mean body-worn camera footage?
No, the cases, your actual
No, the
case
cases. No. We get all the evidence that the investigator considers to be relevant to our ability to do our investigation. If there is some information that is private and shouldn't be there, of course, we wouldn't get it. But we don't get redacted files when they come to us, if that's what you mean.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you once again, Mr. Davey and Lieutenant Brown, for your presentations and your information that you shared with us today. I do have on the agenda that a discussion of the APD citizen contact log and software is to take place. It doesn't say who's leading that discussion, so
I'm going to say goodbye and thank you again for the opportunity.
okay, thank you very
Bye-bye.
much, and thank you for coming.
Sure,
Thank you.
absolutely. Bye-bye.
Councilwoman Baylor, I think that Sergeant Kapler had prepared some information that he wanted to talk about regarding accountability and transparency. And I think the citizen contact log is part of that. So I'm not sure, how long we have, but maybe an expedited, discussion of that is relevant.
How long will you need, Sergeant Kapler?
Well, I was really going to talk about, I sent you guys an email with some attachments in there today, and I wanted to kind of go through that and make sure that the APD story was being told. Some of the things we're doing for accountability and transparency purposes have come out in bits and pieces, but I want to make sure that at some point here we got through some of these things in a little more depth to be able, as far as presenting them to you, and then as well as giving you guys an opportunity to ask questions where you may have them. It might be a little bit more than we have time for today.
Sounds like it.
And we could push it back to another meeting. Certainly, I can do that. But and that may give you time to review that packet and see what questions you guys have. But I do want to make sure that we dive deeper into this and as a committee.
Okay. Sarah, when's our next organizational
The
meeting?
11th.
The next
The
one,
11th.
it'll actually be the 10th because of the holiday. So usually we have it on Wednesdays, but this particular next one will be a Tuesday night.
Is that going to work for you, Sergeant Kapler?
Yes, ma'am. I'll be happy to present whenever you guys want to hear it.
Okay, well, we want to hear it on the 10th of November. So like you said, it gives us time to look over the information you sent us and construct our questions and things like that. So I appreciate you waiting because you want to do the best job you can in that area. And we certainly want you to do that. So with that, I'm going to ask for other next steps as far as information that will be shared. Chalmers, do you have some guests that are going to be coming in on the 10th?
I didn't have anyone else. I know everyone will be shocked by that. But I know that, I had spoken with Sergeant Kapler and Lieutenant Brown and Sergeant Spano, and that, one of the things was that, we talked about this a little bit last time, but I think part of that APD story is that there are a couple of different pieces of software that really are rigorous forms of accountability and oversight that I think ought to be discussed and ought to be disseminated to the public, in terms of, the knowledge that those are being used. And so I think that's the citizen contact log, that's the IA Pro Blue Team system, that's a couple of the other programs. And I think that maybe at the next meeting, if there could be an extended presentation about that, that includes
Sure.
some whether it's screenshots or whatever that help us understand that system, I think that'd be really positive. And then I think the last thing is that there's, I think the next meeting is our last scheduled meeting, and I'm sure we could perhaps schedule another meeting, but, maybe after the last meeting, we have some time set aside to talk amongst us about what we've heard over the last 5 meetings, what some of our conclusions might be. I think that part of that discussion may go beyond November 10th, and I think we want to make sure to make time for that, I think.
Okay. Yeah, sounds like that'll be another meeting. So after the 10th, yeah, we can put our heads together and get another meeting whereby we can do all that and assess what we've heard and the things that we've learned in these meetings so far. So we will do that. So with that, we're going to just look forward to you, Sergeant Kapler, to head that discussion, video, slides, whatever you have, so that you can educate us as best as possible. And then we'll set a meeting date on the 10th for all of us to meet for that last time to kind of wrap this up. Okay, does that sound good for everyone?
Sounds good.
Okay, very good. Thank you guys for your patience. Try to keep within the hour. We did pretty good. Thank you, Sergeant Kapler, for letting us put you on for the next time. So with that, I am looking for a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been second and we are adjourned. So see you guys on the 10th.